Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God. Good morning. Tomorrow is a rare event in this part of the world. We get to see 76% of a total eclipse tomorrow. There's a 75-mile swath going from the Pacific Northwest down through South Carolina where it'll be total for 2.5 minutes or so. Don't look at it. Well, don't look at it here either. Well, yeah, the Nature Center on Colonial and Ortez, but nobody has any left anymore. The fact of the eclipse talks about our creator, our designer, because the moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, but the sun is actually 400 times further away. And it's only because of that precision that we can actually have a complete eclipse the way we have it, such that you have the ring around and so forth. Very specific in size and in distance. And it's not just a phenomenon, it's actually designed that way. Anyway, just thought that was an extra note to add some intrigue about the no extra charge for that. What's that? Right, because you can't have the kids outside because kids are too stupid to be told don't watch the with your naked eye, and they'll go out there and go, oh, look at that. I mean, we nowadays have to put on labels. You know, when we were kids, we didn't have to have those labels because we were smart enough to not know to do that. But yeah, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I think that we need to let our kids eat dirt and get hurt because that's how natural selection works. Only smart people advance to be adults because they did things to themselves when they were kids. Now we keep the kids safe and secure from all the germs, and when they get to be adults, they have germs all over the place, and they're stupid, yes. I mean, it's no other way to say it. That's right. That's right. That's right. It's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. Besides, in Haiti, dirt sandwiches are a delicacy. Okay. For some, yeah. Okay, we're in Joshua chapter 10, verse 12 is where we're picking up. Am I correct? Yay. Only time today. At that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and the moon in the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in the midst of the heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. Okay, stop it. Well, we'll talk about that in just a second. There have been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. So the question was it an eclipse? No. Next Sunday you can answer that question because you'll have stood out there and watched the sun not stop, but go by. So an eclipse doesn't answer the question, does it? Because an eclipse doesn't stop the sun. doesn't elongate time. On page 33 of your book, I have 3 prominent views that scholars give for this event where Joshua asked God to make the sun stand still.
There are those also who say when Christ was on the cross that it was darkness was an eclipse.
Right.
It makes no sense at all.
Well,
It was dark for 3 hours.
yeah. It doesn't make
White cover up for 3
Right.
hours. It's less than 3 minutes.
So we have to figure out as Bible students what occurred, or maybe we can't figure it out. So there are many different interpretations of the text, but here are the 3 primary interpretations. The total eclipse view. This view holds that rather than bringing longer light, God brought total darkness through a total solar eclipse. Primary data for this argument is in the word Joshua used to describe the sun standing still. Translated as stand still in the ESV is the Hebrew word dom, which normally this word is translated to be silent, but it has a secondary meaning to cease. It is in using that use of the word, well, that's a difficult phrase, isn't it? In using that use of the word, that is viewed to say that the sun ceased to shine. The thought is that the shade or darkness would provide Joshua and troops protection. Joshua made a statement that there has been no day like it or before it since. Of course, we know there have been other total eclipses. I think eclipse is actually plural without an S.
This was done backwards though, because it was sunny, so they could see the fight. It was not, so this was not included.
Thank you. Poetic interpretation view. This view holds that there was no time change or eclipse, but rather poetic license in describing the battle. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. The author of Joshua, presumably Joshua himself, is giving poetic license to say that he asked God to hold the sun back and make the day 24 hours longer, and the result was we won the war, but nothing changed. What would be another word for that other than poetic license? It's a 3-letter word, starts with an L, ends in an I. No, ends in an E. Lie. With an I in the middle. Yeah, there's no way that would be a legitimate biblical text if the sun didn't stand still or there wasn't some kind of phenomenon and everything went along just normally, but Joshua was just embellishing the text. Most of the time, embellishment is a lie. So I'm going to reject that view. And as Linda pointed out, the total eclipse view seems to be opposite. Prolongation of light view. In keeping with the historical grammatical hermeneutic principles of biblical interpretation, this view takes the passage literally. It assumes there was an actual elongation of light for what appears like 24 hours. This time-light elongation permitted Joshua to lead his troops in battle to defeat the Amorites. This is the position that most conservative scholars take, but there is a great divergence on how God accomplished this. Slowing the Earth's rotation, a comet near the Earth causing the Earth's rotation to slow due to the gravity of the comet, a change in the axis tilt of the Earth, several simultaneous volcanic eruptions which had the same effect of a jet engine, and refraction of light on the local level. Which one of those do you like the best?
The Earth's rotation, because that has something to do that'll mess up gravity. The sun just stood still.
Well, here's the reality of that. The sun doesn't move, it always stands still. So God would, in order for that perception, the Earth had to stop rotating or the sun had to start rotating. because the sun doesn't move. The sun is a fixed body and we rotate. That's why it looks like it moves, but it doesn't really. These are issues and difficulties, or there are issues with each of these theories. We understand that God supernaturally provided Joshua and troops with more time to defeat the Amorites. God, who created everything and maintains everything, does not need to use volcanoes or comets. He could just slow the spin of the earth and compensate for the increased gravity at slower speed and provide for a much longer day. That's what I'm going to say is how he did it. He slowed the rotation of the earth, and then he also decreased gravity. If he didn't, Joshua wouldn't have been able to pick up his sword. I read last week an article concerning intelligent design. I'm not a big supporter of intelligent design. I think it's a cop-out. But the article was focused on how precise the rotation of the earth has to be, the speed, in order to make gravity bearable. If the rotation, you have to have gravity, which holds us to the center of to the core of the earth, to compensate the centrifugal force of us spinning. Because you know what happens when you put things on the side of something and then spin it? They fly off. That's centrifugal force. It throws you out. Gravity holds you in. If the centrifugal force is decreased, now gravity has a more impact. So instead of weighing 100 pounds, you weigh 400 pounds. Instead of weighing 400 pounds, you weigh 1,600 pounds. If you just decrease the rotation of the earth by a fraction, the amount of gravity is exponentially increased. Actually, the amount of gravity is the same. The effect of gravity is increased. So God had to not just only slow the rotation down, he also had to decrease gravity, or the effect of gravity. And so the only solution, in my estimation, is because God is the sustainer of the universe, actively involved in everything that goes on. He just decided, I'm going to slow things down for a little while. And I'm going to make things not so heavy for a while. I'm going to give gravity a break for a little bit. And I think that's the only way to interpret the text. And I think that's the only way to look at what God says in Colossians about how he does it and put it all together. I don't think he needed a comet. There is no record of any comets of significant size in our region of space to enable that. There's no record that we have any kind of extra time added. But I'm of the opinion that we are looking, that NASA and so forth are looking at everything in the past being exactly the same, and there's no reason to say, that's called uniformitarianism. There's no reason to say that everything was exactly the same, and I think God just did a miracle. The sun standing still is simply an anthropomorphic expression, because we see what appears like the sun rising in the east, and we look and it appears like the sun is setting in the west. It's not. The sun doesn't move. So God had to do something with us. In verse 13, Joshua comments that the facts of the sun standing still, which by the way is not easy to say, sun standing still, is recorded in the book of Jasher. There are 3 references to the book of Jasher in the Old Testament: Joshua 10:13, 2 Samuel 1:18, and 1 Kings 8:12 and 13. All 3 of these passages are similar in that they all speak of some supernatural work of God in the protection of Israel and her military. We do not know if the book of Jasher was an early name of the biblical book of Joshua, or another historical book which is lost to antiquity. It's believed that the book was a collection of songs speaking of God's might and singing praises of the military heroes of Israel. It'd be kind of fun to see it. We don't have it, at least not that we know of, and so it is apparently lost. Any questions on the day the sun stood still? Any challenges to my position? You guys are no fun.
Must have been really perplexing to Tevye.
Huh?
Really perplexing to Tevye. Sunrise, sunset, never mind. Go ahead,
I'm already as tall as I can get. I can't get those. So Joshua returned and all of Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Following the 48-hour battle, in the defeat of the Amorites, Joshua and his troops headed back to the base of operations at Gilgal. Gilgal served as the headquarters area for Joshua and his troops west of the Jordan. Here's Gilgal right here, northwest a little bit of Jericho. In the region today, that is very clearly called the West Bank. Almost still in the Araba, but not quite. And it was the base of operations. It provided the easiest access to the eastern tribes, as well as a good area to camp where the tabernacle could be maintained. Okay, 10:16. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave of Makkedah. And it was told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies. Attack their rear guard. Do not let them enter the cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. In this paragraph, we have the account of the Amorite kings fleeing and hiding in the caves at Makkedah. When they've been found and Joshua was told where they were, Joshua gave some instructions on how to deal with them. Joshua told them to roll stones in front of the caves and place guards on them. When I was studying this, I looked at some discussions by some scholars of whether or not these were possibly grave caves. One of the ways that in the ancient Near East, as we see at the Garden Tomb in Israel, for tombs to be sealed, there are hollowed out mountains or caves in mountains, is to roll a stone in front. Well, you can't just roll any kind of stone. You usually have to prepare a stone to be rolled. And so the question is, were these caves in Makkedah maybe some Canaanite grave or tombs? Don't really know. If they were, this accentuates the level of fear that these kings had, because the Canaanites didn't want to go into graves, tomb graves in tombs. They didn't want to be present with the bodies. That was one of the things that kind of creeped them out. So these kings must have been really afraid if these were actually tombs. Don't know. There's nothing in the text that would lead us to that other than they rolled stones in front of them. Joshua also told them to continue in their pursuit after the Amorites and not let them get back to their walled cities. And Joshua then reminded them that God had given the Amorites into their hand. A small portion made it back to their cities and got inside and were safe, but it was a small fraction that made it. When the pursuit and battle were complete, the troops returned back to the camp at Makkedah, next to the caves where the fleeing kings were hidden. Then Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring these 5 kings out to me from the cave." And they did so and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave. The king of Jerusalem, or often referred to the king of Salem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, "Come near, put your feet on the necks," your feet. Oh, plural, that's interesting. "Your feet on the necks of these kings." Then they came near and put their feet on the neck of their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid or dismayed, but be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight." And afterwards Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hanged them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. But at the time of the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves, and they set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remains to this very day. Probably the next day in time, Joshua ordered the opening of the caves and extracting of the kings. The kings were brought out, and Joshua told the commanders to put their feet on the necks of the kings. Now, I don't know about you, that seems pretty barbaric to me. This should not be viewed as an act of barbarism, but was a common symbol in the ancient Near East to show complete subjection of the defeated enemy. You're standing on their throat. Of course it's complete subjection. But we now have rules against doing things like that. All of Israel could see, and the word would spread, that the Hebrews had completely subjected their enemy. This would provide them with even greater effect as they continued in their conquest of the promised land.
Don't you think that's kind of like when they are told to put their hand on the sacrifice to transfer all the sins to the sacrifice?
Oh.
This is like putting their feet on the people that they beat.
I like the symbolism, except for the fact that the sole of the foot was the dirtiest part and was never used in ceremonial worship. Exactly. Yeah, it was an insult. Remember when President Bush had the shoe thrown at him? Because that still in the East, that is a symbol of tremendous insult. So when you're defeated and you're laying on the ground and your conqueror is standing with his foot on your neck, you got no recourse. And the symbolism of complete subjection, of completely being conquered by the enemy, by the opposing force. I think that's the picture. Joshua used this as a way of encouraging the Hebrew soldiers and reminded them that God has given the land into their hand and they will be victorious. Now, the text gives us, I'm not sure what the order is. The text kind of leads us to conclude Joshua killed them and then hung them. Well, what's the point of hanging them if you've already killed them? Except to make a public display. Yeah. So I don't know if this is a literary device that he killed them and hung them, or is it proper to say hung or hanged?
Yeah.
Okay. Hanged is past tense too. What's that? Either way, you're dead. Who said that? That's good. I like that. Either way, you're dead.
You see the same type of thing in a couple of other places in Scripture. You see that when in the book of Esther, when the 10 sons of Haman were hung in trees. And then there's a couple of other places where they did the same kind of thing, where they killed them and then hung them as a...
Yeah. So
They didn't have Facebook back then, or Instagram, so that everybody could see.
And leave up for a little while.
well, only for the rest of the day,
Yeah.
because at night they took them down. At sunset, the bodies were taken down and thrown back into the caves they had hidden in, and then they sealed them up. Yeah. And depending on how much activity was around them, the birds may have been in already, plucking out their eyeballs and stuff.
NIV says that that's the king should death and expose their bodies on fire.
Yeah. What order that went in? Did he kill him by hanging him, or did he kill him first and then hang him? We don't know. It's an interesting point, but we don't know. Oh, look, there's a new map. As in verse 28, as for Makkedah, Joshua captured it on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He devoted the destruction of every person in it. He left none remaining, and he did to the king of Makkedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. Now, I want to stop for a minute. We see this over and over again, where we read that he devoted to destruction. The phrase there, devoted to, is the idea that it was separated for, made holy for, or was almost, you can almost stretch this to the point where it was an act of worship by Joshua. He set them aside for complete destruction, obedience to God. So when you see that devoted for, think of the act of setting apart. It's the same word. It is the same word that we see when we read holy. Okay? And holy means set apart. Devoted to destruction, every person in it, he left none remaining, and he did to the king of Makkedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave it also and its king into the hand of Israel. And he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, and he left none remaining in it. And he did this to the king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed from Libnah to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and fought against it. And the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he captured it on the second day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish. That's where Butch is from, Gezer. And Joshua struck him and his people until he left none remaining. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Lachish to Eglon, and they laid siege to it and fought against it. And they captured it on that day and struck it with the edge of the sword, and he devoted every person in it to destruction that day, as he had done in Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron, and they fought against it. And they captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and its king and all its town, and every person in it. He left none remaining. And as he had done to Eglon, and devoted it to destruction, and every person in it. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned back to Debir and fought against it. And they captured it with its king and all its towns, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, devoted to destruction, every person in it. And he left none remaining, just as he had done to Hebron and to Libnah and its king, he did to Debir and its king. So Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country of the Negev, and the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but he devoted to destruction all that breathed, just as the Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. And Joshua captured all the kings in their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal.
Busy.
Yeah. That was a bunch of battles, all condensed. He, for whatever reason, as this was being as the book was being put together, even though we have a number of cities and a number of battles, it's a relatively small paragraph that talks about all of these things. We have recorded the destruction of Makkedah. Joshua ordered the complete destruction of the city and all its people, and he killed the king like he'd killed the king of Jericho. Both here and in 10:1, we have a reference to the execution of the king of Jericho, but we're never given those details. We're never told how he did it, other than when he did the king of Makkedah, he did it like he did Jericho, so we can read back into it how he killed the king of Makkedah, he did the king of Jericho. From Makkedah, Joshua and the troops moved on to take Libnah. Let me get a map for you. That's why I put a map there. Put it on the wrong side, so you can see a little bit better. From Makkedah, Joshua and the troops moved on to take Libnah, one of the cities of the Confederation, against Israel. They completely destroyed this city as they did the others. Then they move on to Lachish, then Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. It appears that as Joshua leads the troop through Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir, the quest was not to destroy the cities, but to have them standing and ready to be lived in. So some cities are completely destroyed, and other cities are left with just everybody dead. Yeah, sort of. Left the animals to, the animals had a good feast in Israel during that 7 years. Burying people in Israel is not real easy. Particularly in the region that most of these battles are occurring. This is all kind of mountainous and rocky, really rocky. Until you get up to Galilee, there's no real good dirt. It's all basically rocky desert kind of stuff. And you're not digging very deep holes or anything.
They just killed the people, and they killed all the animals.
In some places they've killed all the animals, but it doesn't. We're not told that here. So it seems like they were just taking the spoils. The first instruction was when they went to Jericho, everything goes. But then we have some lessening of those restrictions, and they were able to amass a lot of wealth as they went through.
It's been frustrating because pigs say, like you say, the pigs will eat anything. They must have had a feast, and then they couldn't eat them.
Yeah.
There's fat pigs everywhere, but no bacon for the Jews.
So I'm glad God didn't make me a Jew, because I like bacon.
That's what I'm saying. I had ribs last night.
What's that?
Yeah, I had ribs last night.
So as they're going through these last cities, it seems like they're keeping the cities intact so they can move into them. Now, think about the transition these people have to go through. They were slaves. Their parents and grandparents were slaves in Egypt. Then they were nomads in the wilderness. And now they became soldiers, and then they will become city dwellers. Sociologically, that's a big transition to make. But they didn't have to build the cities, so it made it a little bit easier. Notice in the text that the taking of these cities we're not told that the cities were not destroyed, but the people were all killed. It appears that the plan was to remove the people, eliminate the military force, but to leave the cities intact so they could be later occupied by the Hebrews. Some of the battles were not even fought within the city, such as the battle for Gezer, which occurred near Lachish. The Gezerites, Butch's tribe of the Gezers, they left their city in an effort to attack Joshua and his troops apart from the city, probably to protect their city. It didn't work, but as we look at the text dealing with the southern campaign, it appears that the plan was to not occupy all the cities, but rather to destroy the military capacity of the region. Now, I have to point out that this was not total occupation and not a total annihilation of the people. This was a rapid movement to destroy the military. They had to go in and settle the land later. We'll see later on in the book of Joshua that there were still lots of battles to occur because they had to do the final step of occupying the land. This was really a military versus military campaign to eliminate the military outposts and the opposing enemy, and then make it easier for the tribes to take their own territory. The best that we can logically conclude is the cities that were protected were good, strong cities that provided lots of resources for the Israelites later. In chapter 15, verses 13 to 17, we see additional retaking of some of these cities. They took the military, but then other people came and occupied the cities, and so we have the retaking of cities happen several times in the text. The southern campaign was in a way setting the stage for the rest of the conquest. We see in the end of chapter 10 that this strategy seemed to work pretty well, with Joshua gaining control over the region with minimal loss and minimal effort. The opposition military was minimalized and became very ineffective in supporting other cities in Canaan. In verse 43, we see that Joshua and his troops returned to their headquarters on the west side of the Jordan at Gilgal. This is where they would return and regroup for the next stage of the conquest. So we have the central in our picture here. We have the central conquest, and then we have the southern conquest. Not a lot had to be done down in this region. This is all really, really hot, difficult desert. This region of Israel is called the Negev, or depending on how they do V's and B's, Negeb. That's this region here. This is the central campaign, and then they went up, and that's what we're going to see beginning in chapter 11, the northern campaign. Any questions on the central or southern campaigns? Okay, let's go on to chapter 11, verse 1. Then Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this. He sent to Jobab, he was a southern guy, Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph. Not easy to say. And the kings who were in the northern hill country, and in the Arabah south of Chinneroth. Anybody want to guess where Chinneroth is?
South of the lips.
Chinneroth. Chinneroth is another, we should know this from our studies of the Gospels. Chinneroth is another name for the Sea of Galilee.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant.
And in the Arabah south of the Chinneroth, so in the Jordan Valley south of Galilee, and in the lowland in the Naphoth Dor on the west. And the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And they came out with all their troops, a great horde in number, like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces, and they came and encamped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. So we have a confederation of northern Canaanites. News had spread about Joshua's central and southern campaign to the rest of the promised land. In verse 1, we see that when the king of Hazor heard of the results of the southern campaign, he reached out to the other regional kings, included Jobab, king of Madon, the king of Shimron, the king of Ashaph, and and as well as the other kings in the what is called the hill country, and the Jordan Valley, Arabah, south of Chinneroth. Hazor was the greatest city in this coalition and in the region. It occupied the most land and had the largest military. Hazor may have been the strongest city in all of the promised land at the time. While many of the cities in the region had their own kings, much of the region were vassals to King Jabin and Hazor. There had been some independence of these cities, but they clearly followed Hazor and Jabin, and in many cases were even protected by Hazor and subservient to Hazor. What that means is there was probably a suzerainty treaty between Hazor, Jabin, king of Hazor, and all the other kings. There was probably a treaty that said, yeah, we're the big guys, we'll take care of you and we'll protect you. But that also meant they then had to be subservient, and they had to send their troops, or as Joshua records here, join the horde against Israel. I think I'm going to stop there for today. Any questions on what we've seen so far today? No questions? Father, thank you for your word and the account of the tremendous miracle of making the sun stand still for a day. What we can learn from that, what we can derive from the reality that you change the laws of thermodynamics, at least for a period of time, in order for your people to accomplish what you want them to accomplish. That should give us great courage and great comfort and excite us about what you're willing to do in order for us to do what you've told us to do. So thank you for the empower that you indwell us with to accomplish your word and your will. Give us a great time in the service to follow where we will fellowship and worship and study your word and be involved in understanding a little bit better what you've told us to do. We love you and we want to serve you and be obedient to you, and we thank you for all that you do in our lives. In Jesus' name. Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.